What's up everybody, how's it going? It's Burke aka Dansgwait here, and this is not really the kind of video that I normally do on the channel, but Final Fantasy VII Remake I think is like a special case, and I did like this article here and the interview that they did and the kind of questions that they covered. So some of us are going to have some particularly burning questions about this remake that's coming, and I was curious to see what the developers had to say about it, so I want to share this interview with you guys. Of course you can just check the link in the description to just read it as text, but I thought it would be fun to kind of go through it and see what kind of things that they've responded for these questions. So Final Fantasy VII Remake developers talk Midgar, Red 13 and more. So let's have a look at it. We've got producer Kitase and we've got co-director Hamaguchi helping to answer the questions. So the first thing that they asked them was, why do you feel that now was a good time to return to the world of Final Fantasy VII? Because that's something that I've always wondered for a long time. I mean, I remember that tech demo kind of thing that they had for the intro of Final Fantasy VII so long ago, and it's like Final Fantasy VII's legacy has been so strong for so long that why did it even take this long to get here? And Kitase basically talks about the fact that of course there's always been high demand for Final Fantasy VII Remake, that's no secret, but he's said that basically it was more to do with, did we have the right technology in place and did we have the personnel in place in order to produce this? So basically their desire was to have, you know, all of the best and most important people at Square Enix to be working on the same project at the same time, and it was only during like these most recent years where they managed to get people's schedules together in the right way that we could have most of the OGs working on this to actually produce the best Final Fantasy VII Remake that they can do. And especially in terms of stuff like the technology, I mean, for a lot of modern day players that might not be as familiar with Final Fantasy, if they were to go back to the original now, like the PS1 era, it's probably going to be too outdated for a lot of people to really enjoy it to the maximum. And especially when you have things like, let's say, Advent Children that came out, where obviously, you know, the CG and everything is just such high quality. They've seen things like that perhaps, and I guess they wanted a game that was going to be able to match up to the more modern day Final Fantasy VII related stuff that they've made in those times. So I guess the technology was at a place where they were able to make it as well. So basically their answer was to do with technology and the fact that they could get everybody that they wanted to working on the project. So next up they asked about the ethos for the Final Fantasy VII Remake being that it was new but familiar, and they asked him what exactly does he mean by that, and his reply was basically talking about the fact that they didn't want to really touch things like, let's say, making the characters very different, because the story and the world is so beloved for Final Fantasy VII that they didn't want to really like change the core of what Final Fantasy VII is. And the core of Final Fantasy VII is of course about the characters and the world that they live in. But he's talking about in terms of stuff like the style and the presentation of the story, that was something that they were much more able to work with. Of course, because of the technological aspect, they can do so much more than what they were able to do all those years ago, and of course this opens up a wide variety of opportunities when it comes to developing the remake. So I mean, basically the idea here is the fact that they're going to do their best to have this kind of sweet spot where people who already know and love the game are still going to know and love it because it's essentially the same game. I mean, the core is still there, the things that make it Final Fantasy VII are still going to be there, but when it comes to having it translate and resonate with a newer generation of players, you know, the modern day technology and the style and presentation is hopefully going to be something that's going to help it translate. So it's that idea of keeping it in a way that the new players are going to really enjoy it and be able to get into the series even if they've never played Final Fantasy before, and also a way to keep fans of the original game happy by not changing the soul and what Final Fantasy VII is all about. So one of the most important questions, and one of the reasons why I wanted to read the article in the first place, was the question about why did you decide to set the game entirely in the Midgar section? Because I was looking through at my LP of the game and it really doesn't feel that long. And of course people have been saying to me that yes, I mean, it's going to have lots of extra content, loads of extra story, but how much longer could it really be? Because I think I saw that my LP, the Midgar section, was about 8 hours long. Now, of course, Final Fantasy games, we're used to them being like, you know, just a story only, like 25, 30, 35, 40 hours. Now, how are they going to stretch it from 8 hours to like triple or quadruple that length and have that much going on within the city of Midgar that we can still call it a full game and pay full price for it? So this was an important question, and Kitase answered this one. His response is basically about the fact that they tried to decide what they wanted to keep as like essential parts of Final Fantasy VII. So previously we talked about the core of Final Fantasy VII remaining intact, and in a way that players who already knew the original and loved the original were going to be happy to play. basically what he's getting at is that they made a decision that so much of the original game was essential and that needed to be translated into this modern day remake, that eventually they realized that they wouldn't really want to be cutting much at all from the original game. So I'm going to directly quote this because I think this is important. So his response is, "At the beginning of the project we had two directions we could go. The first was to make the project with the highest possible level of graphics, visual quality and detail, and not remove anything that fans wanted to see. Instead, it would expand upon the original game to make it something even more immersive. The other option was to include the entire scope of the original game in a single release, but in order to make that work as a modern game, we wouldn't be able to go for the highest visual quality, and we'd also have to cut back on areas and scenes from the original. So compromises that need to be made in order to basically have everything be included that we would have wanted. Essentially, to make a single release viable, the resulting game would have ended up being a digest of the original story, and we didn't think that fans would be pleased with that. And I mean, if it truly is, if by the end of this remake and the episodes, however they're going to choose to do it, if we're going to get the entire Final Fantasy VII story from the original game, plus we're going to have so much more depth from, like, let's say the Midgar section alone, we're going to be seeing a lot more than we would have in the original game. It's sounding like once it's all said and done, we're going to have everything in the original Final Fantasy VII story, plus all of this other stuff that they're going to put in the remake. And if that's what we're going to get in terms of story, then I definitely think this was the right decision to make. I mean, if it's a choice between that, or that they had to take out parts of the original Final Fantasy VII to squeeze it into one game, then I would definitely prefer to play it over the course of multiple games. And of course, from a business standpoint, it's probably going to make them more money to do it that way as well, and that will make sense. But at least he's making it sound like they really are just going to give you absolutely everything that you could want from the Final Fantasy VII experience in terms of the story and the world. So that's something I was definitely happy with. And of course he says that Midgar is iconic to Final Fantasy VII, so we had to start the game here and follow the story up to the main party's escape from the city. Like I said, still I'm not like 100% sure on how they're going to do that, because I think that the final escape was the motorcycle scene, and then you fight a boss that isn't really like an endgame boss, because it basically wasn't. And so how are they going to turn that into something that does feel like epic and cool enough to be an ending of like a full-length game? I was curious about how they were going to tackle that side of things, because I mean, that didn't really feel like it would work as like the finale of the first episode, but we'll have to see. So the next question is, as you say, Midgar is one of the most recognizable and iconic settings in video game history. Why do you think that is? What have you done to make sure you capture that essence in this new game? So I'm not going to go too deep into this one, but he basically says that they had 3 keywords as a concept for Midgar. Those were dark, modern steampunk, and eclectic. And of course they're going to do their best in the remake to pay attention to this and to try and carry through those keywords and those themes and that style over to the remake. And well, I mean, having played the demo, it in that sense is certainly translated for me. I've visually, and in terms of the style and how Midgar looks, I definitely think they've done a good job at that. So I'm excited. But the next question is a more important one, where they ask, how have you expanded the city? Can fans expect to see new areas of Midgar? So this is another one of those good questions. Kitase answers this one, and he says that in the original game there are a lot of breaks where the screen goes black and the game continues in a different location. So obviously anyone who's played it or just like watched an LP or whatever, you'll see that you do skip around Midgar, and there's like an implication that you've traveled further than you have. So even though you've only gone like across from one screen to another, that blank in the middle and the change in environment will lead you to think that in reality, obviously, they would have gone a longer distance and probably gone through a different part of town that you didn't see. So now that they have the technology and the ability to expand Midgar, now he's saying that we're going to fill these gaps in, and you're going to be able to see how different parts of the city are connected, and it's going to feel much more continuous, obviously, compared to what you would experience first time round. So Hamaguchi adds to this, and he says, we focused on giving each section of Midgar its own feel, complete with its own culture and community. There is a large amount of variety within the city, and you really get a sense of who people are and how they live in this place. So I'm definitely excited about how they've expanded Midgar, and I'm going to be spending a lot of time probably exploring it, because there is just so much scope for depth there, and I really think that was one of the areas of the game where like having it remade in 2020 is just going to be like so good for the game, and they're going to be able to really deepen that side of it and expand upon what they built all those years ago. The next and other highlight question of this interview is, some fans have expressed disappointment that Red 13 is not a playable character. Can you specify the role of Red 13 in the game? So Hamaguchi answers first, and he says, I answered a question about Red 13 while we were going around Europe talking to the media, but there was a bigger response from fans than I expected. I got a renewed sense of how much love there is out there for the characters in Final Fantasy VII. So the gist here is, I mean, most of us would have predicted this already, but to hear it straight from the developers I think is an important thing too. But basically the reason why they didn't is because during the Midgar section, he only joins in the later stages of the game, and having him as a playable ally with like a full character growth model and all that kind of stuff wouldn't really be a suitable experience for the player because you just get so little time to use him as a party member. So for now, they've decided to have him join as a guest character instead. Now this next bit is interesting because pretty much anyone could have told you that part of it already, but they've said here, I'm going to quote directly, however, the development team feel the same way that the fans do when it comes to seeing Red 13 as an important character, and we designed his gameplay in a special way to offset him not being playable in battle. So I mean, I'm feeling like, is he a summon now? I won't reveal exactly what that entails because I want people to enjoy it when they actually play the game, but I will say that Final Fantasy VII Remake has added a new upper floor to the Shinra building to present a climax that was not in the original. So this is really cool because it goes back to what I was saying about like the ending of Midgar in the original with the motorcycle chase and then the battle that you have at the end of it. I forget what the name of the boss was, but that should already tell you that it's not exactly going to be a very iconic endgame boss. So maybe the motorcycle escape is going to be like the final thing. There might not be a boss battle at the end of it potentially. So maybe the final boss will be at the top of the Shinra building, and then we'll have like the escape as like the final cutscene, and then the game will end perhaps. So that could be interesting. Now another interesting tidbit is they continue and they say, the key to navigating this floor lies in using Red 13's unique physical abilities to overcome environmental obstacles. Letting the player experience his heroics in this way is something I'm confident will please the fans. So Red 13's unique physical abilities to overcome environmental obstacles, that's definitely interesting. And he finishes off with, I hope everyone enjoys seeing Red 13 in action in the build up to the climax of the story. So yeah, that's potential questions about Red 13 answered. He doesn't seem like he's going to be a summon, but he will be available in some kind of way, and they've tried to keep him like an integrated part of the experience without making him like a fully like playable character that has like, you know, the upgrades and the stats and all that kind of stuff. So that's the deal with that. Next up, we've got, how did you approach the design of the combat system in Final Fantasy VII Remake? How much inspiration did you take from the original game? So Hamaguchi says, at its heart, Final Fantasy VII Remake has the same battle system as the original game. You wait for your ATB bar to fill up and choose what to do from your list of commands. Yeah, okay, I mean, in the most technical sense, yes, but I'm not sure I fully agree with that. But action elements are also layered on top. By skillfully using these mechanics, you can open up the enemy, knock them down, and create a chance to do big damage. You can also much more efficiently charge your ATB gauge. Okay, the combat system was intentionally designed to bring those two together. I think it's a really effective hybrid of action and turn-based combat, and I hope players will enjoy it. So obviously, having played the demo, it's obviously going to be so difficult to find a hybrid that's going to satisfy people that like both types. I mean, if you really want an absolutely pure ATB style of experience, I don't think Final Fantasy VII is that, well, the remake is that, because obviously you've got the whole element of using your sword to attack to fill up the ATB gauge, because if you don't do anything and you just wait for the ATB to fill up, that takes too long for that to be a reasonable way to play through the game. So I'm not sure that's why it doesn't feel as much like an ATB thing. But when you actually, I mean, like I said, in a technical sense, yes, I mean, you do wait for the ATB to charge, and once it charges, you have the option to select different moves to be able to use, so like magic or like special moves and that kind of stuff. So yeah, I mean, it's definitely a hybrid, and just for my own personal opinion, I think they've definitely done a seemingly good job of it so far. I mean, I've only experienced it for an hour, and I've only fought one boss, but it does feel like it's got enough there, and it's enough of a hybrid that it's not really like Final Fantasy 15, which definitely felt way more action, like on the spectrum, and of course it's not like the original Final Fantasy 7 either. But what I didn't do was play classic mode, and they ask a question about it, and they say, you also created classic mode, what was the intention behind that? So they say, we're aware that there are some people who are not so keen on action games. From our point of view, we would be very sad if people avoided our game because of that, especially if they already love the world of Final Fantasy VII and its characters. We want to show everyone this amazing world and all the effort that's gone into creating its depth, so we create a classic mode. This lets you automate the action elements and focus purely on issuing commands in the style of the original game. So if you think, I really love the look of the game but I'm put off by the action, don't worry. We made classic mode specifically so you can enjoy the game in just the way you want to. So classic mode, I think, from what I'm hearing from people who have tried classic mode, it doesn't really... I don't think it's really achieving the desired effect. That's the reports I'm getting. If you have played the game on classic mode in the comments, let me know and see if you agree with the statement that's been made by Hamaguchi-san here. I mean, from what I've understood, it's just like instead of pressing square yourself to attack, I think Cloud attacks himself maybe, like automatically or something. So, I mean, yes, specifically your job might be to just select the commands once your ATB fills, but I think just because of the action element that's overlaid on top, even if that action element is automated, it just probably doesn't have the same kind of feel and atmosphere. And I guess you don't really have the option of Cloud doing nothing. So the only way I think for this to be like a pure classic mode, like a true classic mode, would be that if you don't press any buttons, Cloud will literally just stand there until his ATB gauge fills. And I think this isn't a game that you can play like that, because you're just going to be getting hit consistently. And because the game is still trying to be dynamic to some degree, it's going to be super weird and awkward and clunky if you're, let's say, standing there for 5 seconds, 7 seconds, 10 seconds, waiting for your ATB to fill up. So they pretty much had to do it this way, but I think the classic mode is more for people that's like, if you're seeing it as a little bit button mashy, and you don't like the fact that you have to keep like manually attacking to help fill your gauge, and that kind of stuff, this is a way to ignore that side of it, and just focus on like the more traditional, just selecting magic and all that kind of stuff. So on paper I like the idea, but from what I've heard, the implementation hasn't really been that great. I will have to play it myself to give it a go, but the feedback I've gotten hasn't been great about classic mode specifically. And the fact that the game tells you that playing on classic mode is basically a second easy mode, that also put me off from playing, because a lot of people that play Final Fantasy, I mean, if given the choice between a normal mode and an easy mode, generally most of us will play normal mode just because, you know, we're familiar with Final Fantasy games. So the fact that when you select classic mode, the game says to you, this is basically easy mode, I think a lot of people, I mean, I for one would be put off by that. I wouldn't want to play the game on easy mode. So if there was a way to make classic mode have a more similar difficulty to normal mode, then maybe you might get more people to try it out. But the fact that they're basically pitching it as like another easy mode is probably going to put some people off from using it as well. So let me know your thoughts on classic mode. I think that's one of the things that's most interesting. Luckily for me, the hybrid seems to be good enough for me. I'm probably not going to use classic mode, but just let me know what your thoughts are on that. So the next question is, this will be many people's first time playing Final Fantasy VII, perhaps even Final Fantasy. What have you done to make sure the game is welcoming to new players? My first reaction to this was like, I'm not even sure I agree with this question. I feel like a lot of people that's like playing Final Fantasy VII Remake are probably going to have some Final Fantasy experience before. I am curious about like what percentage of the sales are going to be to people who've never played Final Fantasy before. I wish I could know that stat like further down the line. I would be curious. But yeah, their response to this was that, of course, they want to get new players to be experiencing Final Fantasy VII Remake. And it's, again, the idea of what are the essential parts of the original and why did people respond to the original the way that they did. And they're going to try and capture everything that caused those responses in people, what made Final Fantasy VII great in the first place, but to update it with the latest technology and present it in a way that new players are going to be able to absorb it and enjoy it in the same way that players did back in 1997. And I think they're relying on the fact that you might have seen some Final Fantasy VII stuff before. So there is a line here where Kitase says, "This is where the story of Final Fantasy VII begins. If you've seen characters such as Cloud or Sephiroth in other games, so maybe you've played like a spin-off or you've watched Advent Children or something like that and wondered where their story began, this is the game. We've also intentionally designed the game to be welcoming to all players. If you're a fan of action games or prefer something more tactical, there are different control modes that allow the game to be played to your preference." Yeah, they've done their best to try and cast as wide a net as they could. And based on what I've seen so far as well, this is about as good a job as you can expect from something like this, because it's going to be impossible to cater to everyone perfectly. But the balance that's been struck has looked good so far from what I've seen. Okay, so here we have a final and good question. And it says, fans expect a lot from Final Fantasy, such as secrets or hidden bosses. Is this the case in Final Fantasy VII Remake? Because of course, you know, like your Emerald weapon, Ruby weapon, all of those guys, you're not going to fight them in Midgar. So what is the deal with that stuff? Hamaguchi says, we can't say exactly how much there is. We want to keep some surprises for the players. I will say, Final Fantasy VII Remake has been designed as if it were a standalone game, and comparable in size to other mainline Final Fantasy games. The content you mentioned from other Final Fantasy games. I don't want to say precisely what's in the Final Fantasy VII Remake, but if you're expecting endgame content, you will not be disappointed. So that for me personally is a huge plus, and something I would definitely have expected, because like I mentioned earlier, just the raw kind of storyline element of Midgar is not that long. So let's say originally it took me 8 hours in the original game to get through Midgar. Let's say with this one, even if they triple the runtime and it's like 24 hours to get through like the main storyline of the game, I think players are still going to be expecting more. Like we want another 5, 10, 15, 20, 30 hours more worth of content, and it looks like here they're going to try and give you some good side quest content, some end game content, so that once we're done with that stuff, we're going to have some challenges on our hands, and maybe some secret areas to go to, some super bosses to fight, and all that good stuff. So in that sense, I'm definitely very excited, and that's going to be a way for them to give you an overall game length that's going to be comparable, because I personally still don't think story-wise it's going to be comparable to the length of some of the other Final Fantasy games, but as a whole, like if they put enough end game content and ways to just keep you playing for like 40, 50, 60, 80 hours maybe, then it's going to be, you know, in the realm of the other mainline Final Fantasy titles and be worth the price of admission. So there we go, guys, some interesting questions and interesting answers. Let me know what you think in the comments about any of that stuff, and hopefully I will be seeing you guys for the start of the Final Fantasy VII Remake in like the next couple of weeks. So thanks for watching, take care.